All right, got your roller skates on? Here we go. All right, thank you very much. So we're going to have time for a question and answer. We're going to be running some mics to you. If we can get one of our folks down to this mic to run it, please. Oh, you've got one there. You're already ready. Forgive me for not opening my eyes and seeing how ahead of me you are. If I may, can I start us off by asking you to answer the question, so what do you say to the instruction, or perhaps even correction, that missionaries carry no baton?
Well, I think we have to answer the question, what is the baton that we are or are not carrying? In my estimation, the baton is the gospel that we're taking to peoples around the world. So in a sense, we've been discipled. We are products of local churches. We've been raised up and trained in local churches, and we've been sent out by local churches. And when the local churches send us out to the nations, they send us with a message to proclaim. And I think that message is the gospel, which is a baton that we pass off. Now, let me say this. In Nathan's very helpful response and laying out his response to my paper, one of the things he mentioned is that he talked about church planting in pioneer settings. And I fully agree that in pioneer settings, there is a particular way you can go about laying a foundation that has not been laid. In many places around the world, for better or worse, there have already been certain types of foundations laid, bad or good. And as our missionaries go around the world, you're not doing missions and church planting in a vacuum. And so you have to work within already established cultural expectations about what Christianity is and churches are. And you have to work deftly and wisely and discern how best to train and equip and correct these false teachings or unhealthy practices within the local church. So I do think we have a baton that we have to take. And I do hear and agree with the admonition that we don't need to be the ones running the laps. We have a baton to pass off. I do believe that.
Well, thanks for sticking with the metaphor.
Yeah.
All right, if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you.
So this question could perhaps be asked later. I don't know, but I'm kind of anticipating what's coming in this as well. But I'm guessing that each method that will be shared here today, and this has already been the case, that it begins with Westerners. So the Western teacher in a church setting or a seminary setting, or even if it's a method, it's a method created by a Western Christian. And so the question is, and this is kind of related to the passing of the baton, I guess the baton of leadership identification and development, I guess. But at what point do you feel, and I guess I'm curious even with Nathan and others that will be presenting today, at what point do each of you feel the creation and selection of the methods and the teaching of the Bible theology should be passed on or entrusted to national believers? Because even in the context of this, even in the passing of a baton, it seems it continues within the context of a Western created method or a Western created school or even church. So does that make sense?
I think I'm following. I'm
Okay.
following, yeah.
Please.
Yeah, so there are methods that are used and utilized that are created by missionaries, and those things can be passed on, whether intentionally or unintentionally, right? There's certain things that missionaries have done in the past that they were not intentionally doing that their local partners picked up and understood to be what they intended to do. So yes, it all starts somewhere, right? And so that's why I would argue that we need to go back to Scripture and as much as possible let the Scripture inform what we're doing, but we recognize that every expression of our gospel ministry is going to be tinged with our own cultural biases. Some of it we're aware of and some of it we're not. And so the more that we can go back to Scripture and let Scripture drive what we're doing, then we will have less baggage that is carried on generation after generation. But I think church history shows us that there's just baggage. It's always going to be there. I don't know that we can rid ourselves of it. There's no pure biblical way to do it. So we need to continually reassess, reevaluate, and pursue healthy practices according to Scripture. But I think we need to just relieve ourselves of this idea that we can do it the best way.
Questions?
Dr. Abner, you mentioned that y'all set aside a couple to be a church planters. I'm interested, what qualifications did you look for? Was it elder, deacon, or somewhere else before you decided to send them out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there was, in our particular city, the idea of church planting is not something that is talked about very, very often. There was a sister church in the city that did have a desire to see a church planted in an area that lacked healthy churches. And because it was a friendly church, they were trying to gather a core team. And so we sent some folks from our church out to be a part of that core team. We had seen the husband demonstrate faithfulness in biblical preaching and in serving the body through biblical counseling. He had just demonstrated a faithfulness. So we saw Christ-like character. We had seen his capacity to teach. We had seen him being able to wrestle through decision-making process. So we felt very comfortable and confident in affirming them and sending them out to be a part of that church planting team. But at the moment, he wasn't an elder. If he had stayed at our church, he probably would have been an elder within a few months. But yeah, they wanted to be a part of that team.
You had a question, sir?
We shouldn't let Daniel ask questions. This is scary.
Thank you. Chris, do you feel like the model you guys have prayed about and accepted is paternalistic? And how would you respond if someone painted that model as paternalistic?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Daniel. Appreciate that. Just so you know, Daniel was going through some similar stuff in his city when we were planting our church, and we had a lot of conversations back and forth. So there was a article written by Ralph Winter in one of the Perspectives books several years ago, and I forget the exact title of his article, but he looked at this idea of pioneer, parent, partner, and participant as missionaries. You kind of go through this stage, or through these phases of mission life. I think in our particular context, there is a deference to outsiders because they were a colonized country and a colonized people. And so part of their culture is they defer to outsiders, particularly to white people. And it's not something that makes me comfortable. I don't want that. Like my initial attempt was to be a part of a church planting team and kind of like lead from behind, encourage and push them forward. And that they did not want that at all. They wanted me to participate with them. And so I kept seeking out ways to empower them so that they would lead and that we walk together through that process. Is it paternalistic? I wish it was. We would have made some decisions that I would have been a lot more happy about if it was paternalistic. There's certain practices within our church that it's what the church decided, it's what they want, so we're going to do that. They have biblical reasons for it, and I was not persuasive enough to win. And that's just the way it is. And actually, going through that process, I'm not trying to hide this fact, and I realize that it may have come across that way. I was one of the 3 elders that the church elected in the beginning. So I reluctantly took that because the church identified me as one, and I got to write the Constitution. And so we have 2 3-year terms. So I'm rolling off the Board of Elders this month. And in so doing, we also have a minimum of 3 elders who always have to be serving. So our church intentionally had to find leaders to train, to identify, and to train. And it's not because I said it, it's because the church wanted it. That's what they wanted. Where am I going with that? when early on we were going through some hard decisions about how our church would function, how we would go about training leaders, how we would go about discipling believers, and things like that, I had certain ideas that I thought were important. Our other elders had other ideas, and we wouldn't argue, but we would have healthy debates. And finally, one day I said, you realize that if we voted on this, you guys overrule me. And they said, really? And I said, yeah, you can do that. And the fact that I lost a debate with my fellow elders actually empowered them to take up leadership and continue moving forward and implementing ideas of healthy church and church multiplication and discipleship that, even though I lost that battle, I see in the long run how it actually has enabled us to walk side by side, hand in hand, as participating in the gospel together, not in a paternalistic way.
All right, well, there you have it. Planned extinction, evidently, even in the original documents of the church.
That's right.
So euthanization in missions continues.
Yes.
All right. We'll talk about that later. Any therapists in the room?